that model has to change now. Not like, oh, next year we're going to do it differently. Like, nope, that's going to change now, or you're going to get breached in a really significant way.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am just so psyched for this discussion. Before we kind of dive into all the topics, but we're going to really focus on agentic operations and how operations is fundamentally changing, and it has to change. So Tom, I know everyone knows you, but I want you to say a quick hi. Also Murali too, after Tom. So
yeah,
Tom, say hi.
Well, thanks, Nick. I didn't know everyone knows me, and if that's actually true, should I be nervous about that? But in case you don't, Tom Gillis, I'm the general manager for infrastructure and security at Cisco. So working on all these products and looking at the intersection of those products, right? Which is what I think is interesting.
Yeah, we should have that photo of you on stage at Cisco Live, a few days ago. It was just like mind blowing. It's like you on stage with 30,000 people looking on. It was just crazy. Yeah.
Just really said it before. We're going to say it again. Networking is cool again, right? And so this was the biggest Cisco Live we've ever had in history, which is awesome.
Wow. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Excellent.
Hi, I'm Murali Gandluru, and I'm in Tom's team, Vice President of Product Management for Data Center Networking. I'm responsible for the data center networking business for Tom.
Awesome. Great. Well, okay, let's dive in. I think I just want to provide a little bit of a reference. I think we all know that our world all around us is changing, and that's really thanks to AI, that things run at a much faster speed. And you can look at lots of different ways in which that manifests itself. I think the one that I look at is just Anthropic's meteoric. I'm totally mispronouncing that. Thank you. That growth, just shows consumption, and that we're still compute bound and we're not really demand bound whatsoever. But that also, says that, especially in large enterprises, the dev teams are the ones who are really kind of consuming that and using those tools. And so code is shipping itself. Workloads are able to kind of spin up and spin down much faster than they ever were before. Things are moving more autonomously, than they ever had. And I think the issue, and those are all really good things because it allows business to move at the speed of the market. But the problem is around operations, and operations still does not have the tools in order to keep up. And so we're going to really focus in and hit on that, right now. So I think the thesis that we're going to have is that all of us are infrastructure professionals. This is the biggest shift that I've ever seen in the last 30 years. But the way that we design, build, and run this infrastructure is going to fundamentally change. And I think probably maybe the best example of that, and Tom, you kind of iterated this when we were doing the prep, and that is about 80% of network outages, come really from misconfigurations and, maybe not understanding the configuration right. So that's more human error than anything else. The ASICs doesn't fail, the switches don't fail, the routers don't fail. And that's also a problem that is really well suited for AI. So we'll use AI, and we'll talk about that here in order for us to asymptotically start to go to zero in terms of errors, and to keep the configurations, intact, and also keep us moving more and more towards autonomous. So the arc that we're going to talk about an architectural shift that's happening in operations. We're going to then talk about the operational piece of that. Then Murali is going to do a really good demo for us. So we're going to do a demo and show you how this all kind of comes together. And then we'll talk a little bit about futures. Sounds good, everyone?
That sounds good.
Okay, great. So let's first maybe start architecturally. So the way that we've always built infrastructure to monitor it and to run it, this lifecycle management, has been that we have all these emitters all across the infrastructure, and they emit, and they, it's basically it's an alert, an alarm, an event that happened, and those get distributed up into a centralized data lake, and then something breaks, and then a team is assembled, which takes a long time just to assemble it. And then it's almost like somebody throws a needle into a haystack and they say, go fetch, go find it. that's been the model that we've really had for like the last at least 15 of my 20 years. That model is now fundamentally changing. We're moving more distributed, moving intelligence further down, not only at the switch level, but at the port level. So I thought, Tom, that would be a really good place for you to kind of start, just talking about this shift around the operational infrastructure for lifecycle management.
Yeah. So, what you were alluding to there, Nick, the way I'll phrase it is like, how do you know you have a problem? And the data's there. Again, is the perfect analogy, a needle in the haystack. That there is a needle in the haystack. It's just a gigantic haystack, like way too big to shove all of that data into one place to look at it. So this was the impetus behind the acquisition of Splunk, or the combination of Cisco plus Splunk, is let's create a decentralized model where we can have lots of local data repositories, and then we'll federate across those. So that's going to provide, and what's cool about this is, isn't like, someday, like we have built that federation into our firewalls, which is like typically for most customers, firewall is the number one source of ingestion. But we've also built it into our data center switches. So Murali and team have put this into the Nexus Dashboard, Nexus 1. And then we've integrated it into isovalent. So we can see right down to the process level. If things are starting to change, we're going to be able to instrument that, capture that, see that. Now, we solved the data ingestion problem, but it's still a ton of data. And so the point of this broadcast is that we couldn't make this workable without AI. So having little AI agents that are sitting on those local data repositories and being like, hey, wait a minute, this looks a little off to me. I think something's wrong. That's, it's coming. That's still like kind of just a little bit around the corner. The federation capability is here. But that's going to transform how we understand infrastructure. Did something go wrong? Is the application misbehaving? So we're going to have a much finer level of insight there. And I would argue that's kind of step 0 or step 1 on this journey to bringing CI/CD or cloud operating principles to all forms of infrastructure.
Yeah.
So that's,
so go ahead. I'm sorry. My mind's kind of spinning from what you just said. All right, so great. So we have to, agents like distributed, like throughout the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Those agents, they tend to be in containers, right? And so, and isovalent, allows you to see the containers, not just like on the infrastructure side, but any kind of containers. And so, what I think is really also unique in here is that the network has essentially, for the longest time, been opaque, right? You really can't see into things. Now you can. And I think that's really fundamental, to like this shift. It's both that we're distributing intelligence, operational intelligence back into the infrastructure. And now there are tools for us to actually see what's inside the infrastructure. So
that was something we debuted at Cisco Live just last week. And so we've integrated, as you said, the isovalent container network interface into the Nexus 1 dashboard. And that gives us complete visibility into a workload that is either a VM or a container, like they're treated as peers. And that's not a startlingly new idea, but it's done, right? And it's the platform. And I think what makes it interesting is that, I'll argue that Nexus is the most widely deployed data center platform in the industry, and isovalent is the most widely deployed container networking. So there's not a lot of friction to bringing those two things together. Yeah. But visibility is that's where we start on this journey. Now, the second thing on this journey that we need to really think about is the operating cadence for the infrastructure underneath the application. Switches, routers, firewalls, like stuff that, these are generally considered to be high performance, highly engineered, very, very, very tight devices. And, if I'm being candid, most customers have a view of like, I qualify a design, I test that design rigorously, deploy that design, and I don't want to change that design.
I don't want to breathe on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't breathe on it. Right. Don't touch it. Right. So it's like, you go for a year or 18 months or whatever, and you make maybe little bits and pieces, but you're trying to change as little as possible because you're balancing availability versus, why are you making this change? Security versus availability. And so that's always been a balance that the folks on this broadcast have to listen to. And that balance just went like this. I don't know if everyone can see, but it just tipped by 100x, right? And you know what I'm talking about.
And if I could just add one thing, we are actually, to your point, Tom, we are actually bridging worlds that used to be separate. The VM and containers and the network and app context into one framework. That's what we announced.
Yes. Well, there's a meta theme, Murali, that we're going to come through in this podcast, which is a lot of what we're doing is going to require and also is going to precipitate organizational change. Because the old world where I've got the, sort of the platform team and they do the container networking, and I've got the fabric team and they set the fabric up and they, create tickets to go back and forth. That has to change. That has to change. Right. And the other thing that we're going to show is that the pace at which we update the infrastructure, it has to change. Right. And Nick, you and I did a podcast on this. No, the last one we did recently. We were talking about Mythos and the impact that that's having on software, not Cisco products, any form of software.
Any software. Yeah.
Any software.
Right. Yeah.
It's a step function change. And, not everyone's got their hands on Mythos yet, but enough people are getting on it that, we're all kind of hearing the same cry, like, whoa, right? This is not just, marketing hype. Like, this is significant. So maybe it's probably worth recapping in case anyone didn't listen to the last podcast, but I encourage you to go back and listen because it was good.
It was really great.
Yeah. Here's my take on Mythos, and Murali, you may have a different view, but we've all been using AI coding tools for a long time. And what I would observe is that for new projects, we'd get this 20x, this surge in productivity. The models are incredible. They could understand the whole product and spit out enormous amounts of functionality really, really quickly. But for Nexus Switch, Catalyst Switch, Cisco Firewall, these are very complex products that have been developed over a decade. And they have all kinds of layers of complexity and sophistication. And the models couldn't comprehend them in their entirety. So we weren't getting that 20x lift in productivity. Again, something quite modest. And that's what's changed. So these new frontier models, and it's not just Anthropic, right? Like we have OpenAI models as well. And we're seeing a similar sort of impact. They can understand the model in its entirety. 100 million lines of code, and this thing can slurp it all in and understand it. And that's what makes them so unbelievably effective at finding these vulnerabilities, because it's this kind of weird chain of I change this state in this module, and then it talks to this thing, which sends a signal over to that thing. It goes to this thing, and the computers can string that logic together way better than a human.
Yeah, it is kind of mind-boggling about just all of the interactions that happen in any piece of software, but in networking in particular, it's like that's what networking is all about. Just interactions, between so many different points,
lots and lots of states, right? Yes, exactly.
Lots of states. Yeah.
So as a result, these models are finding vulnerabilities that we have to be careful. We can't tell you the numbers. But it's a step function from what it was before, right? If you look at and these are Cisco devices, which these are very hardened devices. Yeah. So if you think about, the customer's application logic, that's going to have thousands of vulnerabilities. So it's creating a bit of havoc in the industry, if I'm being frank, right? This is all anyone wanted to talk about at Cisco Live. Yeah. What do we do? How bad is bad? What does it look like? And, I call it the summer of turbulence, where we have rolled out a few critical security updates. And when we say these are critical, we mean they are critical. These vulnerabilities are real. They're not theoretical. And here's the other part of those Mythos thing is that not only will it find the vulnerabilities, it'll exploit the vulnerabilities. Yeah. And Anthropic has been incredibly responsible about trying to put guardrails, to do the right thing to limit that. But let's just make the working assumption that the adversary has a capability that it'll exploit these vulnerabilities. It'll find and exploit these vulnerabilities on a black box system. Doesn't need source code. It can just poke at your firewall long enough, and it's going to find these combinations and make them break. It's more effective if it knows what it's doing with source code. But so take that all together. Yeah. Everyone is in this kind of panic mode where they're going to run around and patch everything. It's log4j times 1,000. Every vendor everywhere is coming in with emergency updates. So there's an initial reaction of how am I going to update every single system, every firewall, every load balancer, every switch, go through and making a prioritized list. And we're working with our customers to help make that prioritized list.
Yeah.
Well, let's zoom out for a second. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
What about the next round? Right? Like you think that we're going to do this once. It's not one and done. There's going to be another wave of this in September, and then another wave again. And it's just, this is the new world.
Also, one of the things is that the key to this is being able to do this in a repetitive manner at scale. And so building an infrastructure that supports the ability to disseminate those shields and do that in a predictable manner and in a way which the operations team provides comfort to them as opposed to alarming them is very critical. And that's what essentially stop the attack, stop the vulnerabilities, don't stop the network.
Yeah. So this is
that's where Live Protect comes in.
Yeah.
I think Amithis is going to be kind of a catalyst for lots of different, things. It's like not just around how do you automate kind of the patch management, but also how do you even approach security now, right? So it's like, it used to be, moats that we tried to build moats with like firewalls. We went to cloud. That kind of really expanded that, that threat vector. And now here it's like every piece of software is almost getting rewritten. And like from what I learned out when we did AI networking summit a couple of weeks ago, and I'm sure you heard it loud and clear as well over at Cisco Live, was that there is no working models on how do I deal with this stuff, and how do I deal with it with the velocity that people are imagining that's coming at them. What are the tools that they can use? How do we organize ourselves in order to deal with this? So I think it's a big open, there's just a huge amount of interest in how do I approach this, so, and I know that, Tom, you talked about that.
ONUG community, right? Like everyone needs answers, right? And the truth
everyone needs answers.
Yeah. But the truth is we're figuring a lot of this stuff out on the fly, but we do have a bunch of answers today that are really important. We want to cover in this broadcast. So first is like the old model where I harden that. It's particularly true in the data center, but it's true generally of all infrastructure. But like I harden my data center design, and then I try not to touch it once a year, right? For a major upgrade.
Yeah.
That model has to change now. Not like, oh, next year we're going to do it differently. Like, nope, that's going to change now, or you're going to get breached in a really significant way. Like it's that kind of urgency. Never miss a crisis to drive meaningful change. So we as your vendor are building tools that are going to allow you to adopt a different operating model. But where I need ONUG and the leaders at ONUG to lean in is understand that this change is afoot. And driving change in an organization, especially among networking professionals, is hard because when you're measured on, uptime, you're super risk averse, right? Like that's how like our community operates. But we've got to move differently.
It's a good thing. I'm sorry, Tom. Finish your thought.
No,
finish your thought.
Bring in another one. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And also like this, this community, network engineers, they are so risk adverse, which they should be, and they have to be because like the network touches everything.
Yes.
But also it's like it takes them a long time to like absorb new technologies and innovations, unless they're made really simple and really easy for them, to do. But I think that model is gone. It's almost like they can't rely upon, just waiting, a little bit until they can kind of like wrap their mind around it. And so I think they're in a really uncomfortable place, and it's going to get more and more uncomfortable for them.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
Totally agree. Well, Murali's going to show us a demo that hopefully can assuage some of these concerns, and that the tools that we're building, I think, are a pretty big step forward, and I think they're pretty easy to use. But I don't want to trivialize. I would say the situation we're in, we together, customers, vendors, everyone, the whole industry, it's going to be rough for the next 12 months. There's going to be disruptions and there's going to be headlines and it's going to be bad. So let's try to minimize, the problems. And there's, again, steps we could take on that front too, right? How do we minimize the problems? But let's talk about kind of this new philosophy. Okay. So the old philosophy was nuclear harden it, change it as little as possible.
Operational. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
The new
Right.
philosophy is I'm going to argue is one that's well understood in the industry, and it's kind of the scale out versus scale up systems. It's the view in the public cloud of like, look, you can't achieve the super high availability, so design around it and make lots of little tiny changes on a continuous basis, and do it in a way where a change is not going to be massively disruptive, and so you can easily roll back, and and that's the way we're going to manage infrastructure.
Yeah.
Which I know I'm sure there's people out there that like, they're hard skip the beat. Like, wait, what? but we've taken the first step there and we can prove it. So the way we think about it, and this is a place where I'm really proud of the team at Cisco, because like, we're not on our heels here, we're on our toes. We've been thinking about this, and Murali, you and I have been working on this for years to get to this state, right? So yay. But the way we look at it is we're going to move to a world of more frequent updates. Again, focusing on the data center where things are the scariest. It's probably going to be quarterly. There's going to be an update from us and from your other vendors every quarter that is significant. Like, you have to adopt. You can't be like, we'll catch the next one, right? And so just do the math on that. How many man hours does it take you to process and manage that? What's worse is, even though with these quarterly updates, the number of vulnerabilities, which, if you're watching the video, I'm moving my hands. Again, I don't say numbers, but like I'm using the big indicator, right? Like, there's going to be tons and tons of vulnerabilities in between those quarterly updates that have to be dealt with, because they will be exploited by these automated attackers. So, and that's where we've done something really interesting. So Cisco has introduced Live Protect, and Nick, you and I talked about this last time, but I wanted to say it again. So Live Protect is a compensating control. It's not a patch. We're not touching or modifying the binaries. Okay, and that's important. But it's very, very precise, like laser precise. It's a very specific control that it says, if you see this particular process trying to access this particular file, stop it. Right? And when you can be that precise, there's two big advantages. The first is you're going to have a really low false positive rate. It's not zero, but I'm working on IPS systems forever, right? It's not going to look anything like an IPS. Like, it's going to be this really, 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 like, man, if we get a hit on that rule, we want to have eyes on the glass and see what the heck is happening. And the second is that we can implement this using eBPF, and I won't go into what that is, but refer back to the previous broadcast, extended Berkeley packet filter, which is in Linux, and our competitors could do the same thing, and they probably should. We can implement this with virtually no performance impact. And again, my buddy Murali over here, we've been doing this we had it in production since last December. Back me up. Performance implications of putting a sheet on a running switch. What happens to the switch?
It keeps running as is with the same performance.
No.
Nothing.
So that's really key. That is so big, because like, we're used to like, major patches and upgrades where you actually have to do it on a weekend, right? And it's like, okay, we just so you're basically talking about being able to do these significant patches without getting a hit, without getting a performance hit, without having downtime.
Without stopping the system. You put it on the system while the system is running. Like, in big, giant monster data centers, we're doing this. We had at Cisco Live, ServiceNow was on stage with Murali and I, and they were saying, we have to run on an entire production data center, and we're putting shields on these systems without rebooting or modifying the systems. So these kind of precise controls, right? Yeah. So we think that's a really big step forward, and we think the whole industry is going to have to go this way, because otherwise, what do? You can't update every week.
Really. It's like, we're going to shut down the network to upgrade it, and then turn it back on. It's all, that's a non-starter, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think all of that is really good, but I want to, I do have a little bit of a format, I want to go back to. So operationally, so it's like, so normally the way that we would deal with operations, right? We have networking teams, we have security teams, we have the application teams, we have the development teams, right? And so in smaller companies, we had DevOps, right? And where like, you can, where the developers weren't just throwing over something new over to the operations, team, but they were actually not responsible for the operations of it. That never really took off in the large enterprise. There was still, you got big dev teams and you have big operation teams because the systems are so big and they're so complex. But that's just not going to scale anymore because even a good example like at JPMC, when they need to make a change to the infrastructure, they need 100 people to kind of sign off on that. That won't fly anymore.
Yeah.
Networking and security has always been, the technology has been combining, those groups and creating more and more overlap around those groups. We've seen organizational shifts happen before, especially in our industry where we had voice groups and we had data groups and they became one group, as well.
Yeah.
So I think now, in order to be really prepared and to be able to deal with kind of a much faster life cycle management, thanks to not only just the LLMs discovering, the need for patching, but also just the breadth and the scale that the dev teams are writing applications. What are you all thinking about in terms of how should kind of management teams start to think about operations? Like we had separate NOCs, separate SOCs, you have L1 and L2 engineers. A lot of that is looking to be automated so they can move up. Have you kind of we should provide some talking points for the community to start thinking about how should we really be thinking about organizational wise the infrastructure teams?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the honest answer is we together have to figure some of this stuff out. Now, the tooling, the procedures, the philosophies that have been in place for decades are changing, and they're being driven by this mythos change urgently. Not over the next few years, it's over the next few months.
Yeah.
And so it's likely that the organizations are going to have to change too. And that of course will be, slower. Will it look exactly like the DevOps model? I don't know. But I will tell you, I was talking to the infrastructure team for one of the largest retail banks in the world. And they were saying kind of along the lines, Nick, of we want the CI/CD model. We want to repave the whole thing every night. The whole stack. Yeah. Switches, routers, firewalls, load balancers, database, web server, the whole kit and caboodle. We want to spit it out, repave the whole thing.
Yeah.
And that's technically within reach.
Yeah.
It's not completely out of the question. Now there might be some nuance on exactly how we do that. But yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because on
the L1, L2 part of the operations, it's the repetitive tasks that get automated and the roles shifts one level up. Essentially, you're doing less of ticket opening and closing and more designing of the guardrails that agents operate within. So, where engineers would firefight past midnight, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., they become the ones teaching the system what good looks like. And that system will learn and it is able to operate at much wider and bigger scale.
Yeah. I think the whole day 0, day 1, day 2 has to be really rethought, now, and especially day 2. All right.
Yes.
On how much that is going to be now automated and the tools that we're going to get to do that kind of automation. And I think, it's like, this might be a good segue for you, Murali, to do the demo, but I think maybe one point before we do that, Tom, the more I think about it and the more kind of discussions that we've been having is that, a CI/CD kind of model for infrastructure makes sense, because, really when it comes down to it, clearly there's a lot of hardware in networking infrastructure and security infrastructure. But the main point of that is the software. And that's really what's being upgraded and patched. And we have all the processes in the dev teams to do that. And if that's the case, then it'll be interesting. Okay, and I've seen this actually, within the ONIP community, is that the dev teams now are trying to make changes to the infrastructure, and the infrastructure people are saying, time out. It's like, so there's a role responsibility thing.
It's a battleground on that, right? But now it's the whole infrastructure stack. But I do agree with Murali and Nick. You were saying this is that is very clear that we can use agentic applications to either fully automate or highly automate that upgrade process.
Yeah.
And I couple that to this Live Protect thing. So Live Protect is the bridge between these updates, but the updates are going to be more frequent and nothing you can do about it. And we have to together figure out how can customers ingest these updates, much more frequently. And that's that CI/CD philosophy. So
yeah, well, you find, I actually, Tom, and you just kind of tied two, dots to me, that are really important. One is that Mythos is going to kind of drive infrastructure teams into a more CI/CD kind of model, because the upgrades, and it's almost like we're patching. We're going to have a huge amount of patching that's going on, but that's like, it's the same kind of process of like actually committing new software, as well. So it's like, so they're forced now to do this, and so they're going to have to get that, that skill set and that mental model, as well. So, Murali, this might be a good time now. Okay, let's think about, agentic and how agentic is really going to be kind of forcing that change and the kind of tools that we're now have access to.
Absolutely. As you might imagine, everything starts from Cisco Cloud Control. And Cisco Cloud Control essentially is the platform that sees across compute, network, security, storage, and then across domains, data center, campus, branch, the backbone WAN. And essentially, it acts on what it sees across these domains. That's what AgenticOps effectively means in practice. So when you look at this particular dashboard, you see sites, you see multiple locations, and that was the topology view. But then if you also look at the inventory view here, you get to see what kind of security exposure do you have? What kind of lifecycle horizon? Are they any of LDOS environments? Are they past LDOS? So the compliance and governance, the compliance posture further around policy and control as well. So everything is visible here.
Yeah.
So when you go to
early in the broadcast, we talked about like step one. Really just showed us step one, which is like, what do I got?
What do I got? So inventory. Yeah.
Dude, but like most people don't really know, like, and like, is this out of support? And what's the version of this? Right. So we've taken the big step to make that answering that question easier. And you just saw it, right?
So can I ask a couple of questions on this one? Mm-hmm. So that's the inventory piece, right? Okay. So so compliance exposure. So I would think that there's a lot of kind of intent-based, engine that's kind of going to drive this. So like every industry is going to be a little bit different around their compliance. So there's got to be modules associated with that. The lifecycle horizon. Explain that. What do you mean by that?
What it means is basically is that you've got a particular set of switches, firewalls, you've got a bunch of servers in your environment, they've got software. Those software and the hardware associated with it, essentially, are they in support? How many days of support is left? Are they past the last day of support, which is a short form LDOS? Are they within the 90-day window? You get a view of your risk of compliance or being out of compliance. What's that window look like?
Okay, great. And then security exposure. So is that like, systems that have not been patched?
Yes. Yeah. What are the kinds of we have a lot of P-certs, vulnerability CVs all the time showing up, right? And particularly as Tom just said about in the Mythos world, you're going to see a lot more. And that's just not Mythos alone. There's just a lot more other environments. So this gives you a clear idea about what are your clean assets, what are your high risk assets, and what's somewhat for medium term risk assets. That's it.
So I would think like in a Mythos world, that orange that says high is going to be like, almost like the entire circle, right? If you're not patching, right? That's
it's about hardening your environment. And this allows us for us to, as Tom said, the philosophies, changing the philosophy around how we think about support, how we think about hardening your environment infrastructure, and what's that cadence look like?
Yeah. Okay, great. Perfect.
So when you think about the topology that typical network infrastructure or even cross-domain infrastructure operators look at, you've got a view of the devices, number of WAN appliances, number of sites, locations, campuses, all those in one place. And when you provide that kind of a view, you also are able to see what's your health status in all of these, right? am I seeing warnings in my data center switches? What kind of unhealthy, poor compliance or other kinds of things exist in that environment? So let's go into Nexus Dashboard. Particularly in this case, Nexus Dashboard looks at your entire data center network asset base. And typical view of a network topology looks something like this. And remember, we launched from Cisco Cloud Control into this. Similarly, you could do the same thing in campus. You've got a typical spine leaf design. You've got connections out into the internet. But guess what? You don't have one big viewpoint. And that's somewhat by design, which is what's behind that Kubernetes AI cluster. So in a world where workloads, I think over 66% of the workloads are AI, of AI-centric workloads are on Kubernetes, you've got to have your operations team know how and where issues occur and what kinds of application profiles, transport profiles look like. And so that's what we've fundamentally changed with the isovalent technologies that we acquired. And now you're able to see inside the application from your network operations window itself. So you can see
that's really
who's talking
great.
to whom. Yeah.
So this is showing how, so if I look in there, web app database and a namespace, and then here we have agents. So, okay, great. And that's just by clicking on that one switch.
Absolutely. And essentially, you've got configuration that pushes down all the way into those CNIs. And now you have the ability to not only get visibility, you've got isolation capabilities and control as well. Tom?
Yeah. We talked about this at the beginning of the broadcast, bridging worlds. Like today, the DevOps team and the platform team has visibility into the connectivity and the networking for the containers, but the fabric lives in a totally different domain. And conversely, if you're looking at the fabric, a giant complex Kubernetes cluster, like all the purple stuff, looks like a little tiny blob.
Yeah,
just an IP address. And so we now neutralize that. So at least we know what we're dealing with. Step zero.
Yeah. Yeah, true. And to kind of the bridge though of the gapping between groups is visibility.
Yes.
So like, inventory and visibility. So, and then management, so yeah, this is great. Continue.
So the next step from visibility is essentially about policy, right? The platform teams, the one that's responsible for the Kubernetes infrastructure, they typically define the policy. And now we have a way for that policy to flow through into the network as well. And now you are able to take a look at how that in this particular case, the AI cluster policy enables a particular traffic flow. You see the green dots flowing across. You flow across from the app all the way across out into the internet and probably likely ending up in another location or accessing some kind of application or data environment in another location.
That's really cool. So like the box.
If you've got an app that has containers and VMs in it, so you get an AI front end, but the database is running in a VM, you can now have like a PCI requirement for segmenting that app across the VMs and the containers, single view, single policy, single management troubleshoot of it.
Yeah, that's
and if I could,
that's great. Yeah. And I guess the only thing I was just saying, just like make sure I got it. So like the box on the bottom, that's basically just showing the path and the packets within kind of the containers. And then, so that's a logical view. And then on top of that, the green is the physical view, like on really how packets are transported.
Exactly. And by the way, so all of this hides a key element of enablement and innovation that has happened at the data plane level from the CNI perspective, as well as on the switches, which is EVP and VXLAN all the way adjacent to the workloads. That's now implemented on isovalent as well. So it's seamless technology. That allows you to carry the metadata associated with the policy all the way across as well. Across one fabric, across sites, locations. Now you can see how it scales. How policy information also scales across environments.
Awesome. Okay. It's continue.
Yeah. And the third big part is what we've spent some time talking about it here is you've got to make sure that your environment, especially, particularly in the current world we are living in or entering, is about making sure your devices first, you have visibility into how uh, out of compliance or what kind of advisories are associated with your networks. And since we talked about the framework of how you would actually apply policies, look at this. You can see that you have a whole bunch of switches, all the reds there. Effectively, you've got all those devices needing to be dealing with security advisories. So now what we actually can do is we enable Live Protect. Live Protect now is a capability that has two modes. One is monitoring. We want to earn your trust by first making you get comfortable with the notion of saying, okay, I have visibility into all of these devices, inventories, and assets that exist in this fabric that essentially allows me to see which ones are out of compliance or which ones need advisories. Once you're comfortable with it, now you can actually go into Live Protect enforcement mode, where you can actually use the framework of Live Protect to go and apply the compensatory controls that Tom talked about earlier. This allows you to, in real time, be able to stop the attack, stop the vulnerabilities. And in Tom's example, it was a granular file all the way down. And you can now build a planned approach to patching or a full software upgrade, something that was not possible earlier, right, Tom?
Yeah, that really is like kind of fascinating. So like when I'm looking at this graphic, I'm thinking, okay, and when I'm thinking about compliance, I'm thinking, okay, well maybe these have not been upgraded, or updated, so they're patches that are missing, so they're out of compliance. So which is huge. Like one of the biggest hassles for any kind of networking team is when you're going through kind of you have a regulator and you have to kind of prove that you're in compliance. Yeah. The rock fetches are just horrendous, so yeah, this is great, Murali. So continue. So we had policy,
Okay.
And now we have advisory.
So then you apply this across all of these environments, and essentially once you do that, it's Live Protect shield status shows that it's protected. And obviously every time there is an approach or an attack of trying to exploit that vulnerability, the hit counters that you see here, they will increase. Right now, there is no hit, so it's 0, but the hit counters will increase.
Yeah. And Nick, this is what we talked about earlier, which is like, it needs to be just brain dead easy, and it's that easy. It takes a few seconds to deploy shields across, an entire fleet of thousands of switches, like boom, push, go. So we want to make it so, we put a human in the loop, as Murali said. It's got like a passive mode, non-disruptive. But once you get comfortable that like these things, are very, very, very tuned, they're intended to be just automatically deployed. And that's a big, big step forward. Big step.
Yeah. So a shield is an agent. Is that right?
No,
and it's
a shield.
Okay.
You could think of a shield as a policy. So the shield is the policy that says, don't let this process talk to this one file. It's an expression of what not to do. The agent is already baked in. The thing that does that enforcement is already built into our operating system. So
yeah,
Rose team put it into the NXOS that we were shipping last December. We announced it in our SD-WAN. We're putting it into our router switches, but it's going to go across the whole Cisco portfolio. So
okay.
Yeah, and
so these are like the rules
in place.
Yeah,
they're like, it's like a rule. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, awesome.
And the consistency of approach, Nick, remember we started at the same Cisco Cloud Control that the entire portfolio has. Then the approach to Live Protect, again, same across all of the environments. So there's that theme, and it's the same product being used across multiple environments as well.
Yeah.
So I want to quickly go and point out a few things and just shift gears. Another element of secure networking that we're fundamentally disrupting is around how you think about segmentation. Typically, traditionally, this is how an architecture looks like. You've got spine leaf designs, and you've got firewalls hanging off of a border leaf or a border gateway. And essentially, all the traffic has to go hairpin to the firewall. third party even, and it works. It's totally fine. What that results in is essentially a drop in the ability to do the higher latency numbers, and essentially that means that is actually sometimes not compliant, particularly for latency sensitive workloads like AI workloads. That could be a problem. So what we've introduced is the smart switches, and these smart switches essentially are any Nexus 9K today, but again across the whole portfolio, Nexus 9K switches having DPUs built on them, and you can actually apply and turn on services that enable segmentation that you can now do inline, and instead of having to do hairpinning to go to a firewall and have that run and then come back and then go out the same port. This allows for much better inline approach to security, and that allows for a much higher throughput, higher amount of firewalling, as we call it, 20% in this case, traffic filtration, and a much better latency as well.
Yeah. So this kind of like, brings essentially the firewall down to the port level, right? And so, there's no hairpinning, there's no going back to like, some firewall. It's fully distributed into the fabric.
Particularly at the layer 3, layer 4 level, where the network devices can do that at scale inline. That's where essentially this is most effective, and that's why you see that the segmentation capabilities that would have sat on the firewall, you can now bring it in-house. So now the firewall is not burdened with, or they can focus more on higher layer application layer services and stuff like that. Things like NAT at scale. All of these things can happen now at the smart switch itself.
Yeah.
Inline.
Okay, awesome. What else you got?
And so, and that's effectively it. And back to you, Tom.
That's great. So I think like with that demo is that, a lot of this visibility is afforded by kind of the agents being built within the switch, and then you're kind of building on top of that, is really kind of what I picked up from that. And along with that visibility, then you now have multiple teams that have different roles that can actually be looking at the same thing, and that's that's huge. That's really huge, especially around resolution or being able to make sure like you are kind of you can move, the infrastructure can move at the pace of the application developers, now, as well. And the ability to kind of secure and harden the infrastructure with keeping up with patch management, also. So
CI/CD, right? That's the goal, But Nick, as we said at the beginning, the tools that we're building, the way we're building these products, are changing dramatically. But I think the bigger change has to happen is the organizational change and the operating philosophy of the entire network community. Never miss a good crisis to drive change. Well, we got one, right? And I think together we're gonna have to muddle through this pretty quickly.
So if we think about also like the progression, right? Because like to me, this is like kind of the first step around autonomous infrastructure. All right. So it's like the first step is really having much greater visibility, the integration of the technologies, networking technology and security technology, and also agentic, being built, with deep within the infrastructure, the architectural shift that we talked about as well. There's some amount of automation that you're building into this, but where do we go from here? How are we on a path towards autonomous infrastructure, where the infrastructure can run itself, and it can fix itself and it can patch itself,
Yeah, I think so. I think, within months, and, maybe it's 18 months, but it's right at hand. So the other thing we announced at Cisco Live was digital twinning technology, right? And if you think about a problem of upgrading network infrastructure, an AI agent that's observing a system like a switch running in an environment and understanding that environment and then managing the upgrade process and to say, did something change or did it break? AI is going to be incredibly effective at that. And so couple that with what we're doing with Live Protect. Live Protect is the bridge in between these upgrades. And then we're working on digital twinning and AI agents that are going to drive lots of little changes. And it's going to look like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. Like we could shut the bridge down, paint the whole thing, right? And stop the traffic, right? And or we could have a tiny little crew out there. This is what they do in San Francisco. It starts on one end of the bridge and they just kind of make their way all the way across. They flip to the other side and then they make their way back and they just keep going, right? Like all the time. There's a paint crew up there. It's amazing. They do it in a non-disruptive way. Yeah, that's the model. And we have a lot of work to do on the tools still to get that to realization. But we're racing to get that done. And there's no other way. There's no other answer to this Mythos problem.
Yeah. Well, also too, that dawns on me is that, and we kind of knew that it was coming, but like a massive infrastructure upgrade, because like, you can't just like, go backwards or basically put a lot of these features and these functions onto older equipment. It's like you need to upgrade all the equipment, with this. But the thing that's happening now, though, is that you upgrade, you become AI enabled, and you get autonomous, operations, with it. So it's, the value proposition is really strong.
That's right. When we get through the summer of hell, and it may turn into the year of hell, I don't know, but like when we get through this turbulence that we're heading into, the world will emerge to, it's going to be way better.
Yeah.
Like, who likes upgrading firewalls and load balancers and switches is very cumbersome and it's not really valuable at work. Yeah. So if we can have it where it's either fully automated or highly automated, and it's the infrastructure underneath will be way more resilient, that's a good outcome. And I think that's at hand. I think we can achieve that together.
Yeah,
with ONOD, right? That's why we're here.
Well, that's great. Well, the community needs the help. They clearly need to be. They're on this path, towards, hey, we've got to like upgrade this infrastructure, and we've got to be able to support, the business.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good place for us to like, stop. Wrap up. I thought this was like really, really great. So, I think it was the first really kind of like hardball around AgenticOps. And, especially, Tom and Murali and the work that you all have been doing over the last couple of years and how that's coming to fruition. And I think the trend lines that we're now just going to start to see. And really, I think my big takeaway from this was this whole patch, this summer of hell that we're going to be going through is also going to give teams more AI tools and skill sets. But also, it's going to force an organizational change, around software lifecycle management for infrastructure. So, anyway, this was great. Thank you, guys.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Murali. Thanks, everyone, for plugging in.